Manly Hall official, is glad to produce, publish and offer. The homage. Civilization, with its spreading power, dissolves into itself as quicksilver the wild places of the world. Where mighty forests once raised their crested tops, gloomy buildings, chimneys, and iron girders now dark and narrow cobbled ways where the natural grandeur of things has been swallowed up in the sordidness of human concept. Here and there, however, are still spots where the devastating hand of man has not rested, where the sound of the axe, the cries of the woodman, and the rumbling of logs has not broken the primeval stillness. One by one the savage denizens of the wild, the beasts untamed, have slunk away into these untrodden places, into the rocky mountains and lonely crags where they gaze out with great furtive eyes at the hand of civilization which, as it devastates the primeval wilderness, strangles out their lives. In a certain land where there is a mighty range of mountains which raise their rough and wooded sides like great supplicating arms to the skies. The barrenness of these hills is clothed with the verdant garment of tree and shrub. Mighty straggling monarchs of the forest toss their branches upward as though to grasp in their shaky fingers the clouds that hover over them. A narrow trail winds up to these mountains, barely a footpath. Here and there it leads over loose rocks and broken boulders and from stone to stone across some waterfall that descends like a stream of crystal from the snow peaks far above. There is no silence in that wood, for there is ever a swishing, ever a rippling, ever a sighing, as from the mountains pour the streams of water or through the treetops the wind whispers its message to any ears that are there to hear. Up this narrow path climbs an occasional hunter, for the deer still peer shyly out from the thickets or spring from rock to rock and amid the scrub growth that clothes the walls that rise on either hand. Here too the mountain lion lurks, and at night his shining eyes gaze from the darkness at the campfire of the hunter. Here also are wolves and foxes, and in the lower valleys dwell coyotes that howl at the gathering shadows as the shades of evening fall. Mayhap an awkward bear will cross the path and waddle along on his short, ungainly legs. It is the joy place of the hunter, who, with the glee of the sportsman, slays to prove the merit of his aim. There are many stories told of those mountains, many legends which the mind of the ancient red man fashioned and the mind of the jesting white man perpetuates. But there is one legend that is the strangest of all, the story of the old man of the mountain. It is said that somewhere up in those hills there lived a hermit who had dwelt there many days. As far back as the old hunters could remember, the story was told of how one, tired of the world and its shams, had crept away from all living things of men to go and live in the mountains, among the crags whose lofty peaks touched the sky. If you're enjoying this video and finding value in the content, we kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel. A large portion of our listeners and viewers haven't subscribed yet, and by doing so, you'll help us grow and continue bringing you more high-quality audiobooks. Your support means a lot to us, and it's just one click away. So, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to stay connected and never miss out on our latest releases. Once in a great while someone saw him far in the distance as he stood mirrored in some mountain lake or in sharp outline against the sky. They knew him as the old man of the mountain, the hermit of the mighty peaks. Some said he was good, some that he was strange and cruel, but all loved to tell of him, to guess, and to speculate. Once, in the course of human events, There climbed up the mountain path that wound in and out along the rugged sides of the hills a whistling youth. Over his shoulder was slung a rifle, a cartridge belt was around his waist, and on his back he carried a pack. He was going into the hills to hunt. With the enthusiasm of youth, he would slay the lion and the bear, the deer and the wolves whose howling he had heard from the valleys below. Round and round the path wound. The hours went by, the gloom of evening fell, and still the hunter was far from the crest of the mighty hill where little scrub pines shone out from the ever-encircling band of snow. The chill of the mountain was in the air, the valley was long since dark and tiny twinkling lights below showed the abode of men. Still the glow of daylight was on the mountain peak, and as the youth stood there in the semi-twilight, the silence was broken by a crackling sound as of the breaking of twigs and the swishing of branches. Looking quickly around, the youth saw standing before him a mighty stag. His great arched antlers had a span of many feet, and his noble head was raised to catch the passing warning of the atmosphere. Two large mild eyes gazed at the youth who, in the frenzy of the hunter, reached for his gun and drawing it rapidly to his shoulder gazed along the cold steel sights toward the heart of the stag. Just as his finger was closing upon the trigger, a hand was laid upon his arm. The youth started, the gun slipped from his already nervous fingers, and he turned in amazement to gaze into the face of a strange being. As he turned, he gave a start, for such a figure few men have seen. The face bore the marks of great age, and the snowy locks that bordered it were whiter far than the mountain tops that had stood there since eternity. The figure of the old man, for such it was draped from head to foot in a cowl of gray cloth, and he carried a great wooden staff in his hand cut from the limb of a dead tree. His eyes, however, were the wonder of the picture. Two kindly, twinkling eyes that could register even the faintest shade of emotion, one moment gleaming with the joy and youth of life and the next dimmed by the tears of sorrow, gazed into the face of the hunter. The old man's hand was resting lightly upon his shoulder, and his sweet old face held soft rebuke. You began the youth. Are you not the old man of the mountain? The stranger nodded his head, and a voice, mellowed by years of goodness, answered softly and kindly, Yes, I am the hermit who lives in these hills. But why do you shoot my stag? Your stag, exclaimed the boy hunter. How does it that you own the beast? In this world, the old man answered, proper use warrants ownership, and those who use God's creatures well have the first claim upon them. The old man held out his hand to the stag, and the great beast, though viewing the hunter askance, slowly came across the little clearing and rubbed his soft face against the old man's hand. The hermit put his arm around the neck of the stag and spoke to it in soft, sweet tones. Just a few sighing sounds, like a pitiful cry, the old man made, but the beast seemed to understand. Its soft nose was turned upward, and its eyes looked at him with a tenderness of expression which moved even the hunter. The old man turned to the youth. Do you still dispute my ownership? He asked. Do you still doubt that he is mine and I am his? What were the words you used? Asked the youth in surprise. How did you talk to him? I spoke in the words of the forest and the trees, he answered. That is his language. He hears the voice of fear and the crackling of the twigs and the stealthy footsteps of the hunter. He hears life and love in the voice of the waterfall and the soft swaying of leafy branch. These are the sounds of his language, and during these many years in the mountains I have learned to talk with the tongue of beast and bird. Yes, I have even learned to talk with the trees and flowers who hear my voice and shelter me with their love and protection. Listen." The old man breathed out a soft stirring sound like the breath of dawn in the treetops, and from the shrubs and bushes around an answer came, the same soft, stirring sound, and voices seemed to whisper, "They all know me, they all love me, for I have lived here 80 years and never once have I injured God's creatures. When I want food they bring it to me of the ripe fruits of their store. The little squirrels bring me nuts from their harvest, while the trees give me of their fruit, and from their own dried leaves they form a shelter which guards me in the chill of winter. You have come into these hills like the spirit of man oft times comes into the world to slay and to hate. Not that you really care, if in your soul you do not loathe the beasts, but to you their souls mean no more than a drop of water from yonder stream. But I have learned to look upon with love even the drops of water, for each one as a message. I have lived up here so long that the trees and birds and flowers are one with me in spot. I love them all and truly they love me. Come, young hunter, lay your gun aside for a while, for in my eyes, and in the eyes of my children of the forest, that gun mean hate and death. You need not fear, leave it here, and I will ring you back for it anon." The youth lay down his rifle and, taking the hand which the old man held out to him, followed him away from the path and into the depth of the great green forest wrapped in evening shades. Mighty trunks rose up about him and falling leaves descended like a gentle rain upon him as he passed. Suddenly the old man stopped. "Look," he said. From the side of a tall tree a big gray squirrel came and stood pertly gazing for a few seconds, then vanished like a little flash of dusky shadow to appear a second later carrying in his teeth a ripe hazelnut. Scampering down the rough trunk he climbed up the hermit's gray robe, and as the old man opened his mouth the little gray squirrel placed therein the hazelnut, then hopping onto the old man's shoulder, sat up there, his little beady eyes darting first in this way and then in that. The hermit took the nut from his mouth and held it out to the hunter. "See how they care for me. But it is no more tenderly than I have cared for them." He spoke a few soft words to the squirrel, which darted away like some little tree sprite into the darkness of the gathering night. He had barely vanished when the youth suddenly jumped back in fear and amazement. Before them on the road stood a great wolf, his tongue lolling out and great tusks bared. A growling howl broke from the beast. "He does not know you," the old man explained, "for whenever he sees men they throw something at him. Whenever he meets them he expects the flash of flame that pours from their rifles. Therefore he hates them even as they hate him. But come, you are perfectly safe." Then he stepped up to the wolf and, bending slightly, placed his hand between the beast's teeth. The wolf drew back its head and licked the kindly hand. "This," explained the hermit, "has its price. If you essayed this feat, your hand would pay the price and probably your life. But what have you done for the beasts that they should so love you?" "I have been true to them. In the cold winter nights I have sheltered their young in my little cabin, I have fed the babies that the hunters left parentless, and in the spring I have loosened them into the world. Many years ago a hunter climbed these hills and slew the sire of this wolf, another slew its mother and 3 little cubs, 3 howling, fighting, spitting little handfuls of flesh, were left in my hands. I nourished them and guarded them, and they played with my mountain lions and romped about with the bear cubs that I have in my cabin. The springtime came and they went their way, strong enough to protect themselves. This is one of them. The other two mayhap we shall see also, unless the hunters have slain them. Then they went on further along the path of nature's miracles. The great stag walked behind them, his arched antlers breaking the tree branches as he passed. "Look here," the old man spoke, pointing to a crutch in a tree just a little ways ahead. "In this nest are 4 little birds. Yesterday the sound of a gun was heard in these mountains. There was a fluttering of wings, and with a screeching cry the mother bird fell downward from this nest. There was a great whir of wings, and with a hoarse cry of rage the father bird flew straight into the face of the hunters. Another shot was fired, and he too was laid low without even a fighting chance. Now hear the cries in the trees." The old man climbed up onto the broken stump, and from the encircling arms of a dead pine he drew a nest, in its several little shrilling specks of life with ugly featherless bodies and great gaping beaks. "I shall take these 2 with me to my cabin, and drop by drop I will feed them as I have long ago learned to do. Their mother and father are gone, slain by one of my race, but among the beasts and birds I have tried to redeem my people and to prove to them that in the heart of man there is still a generous spirit." His soft hand cuddled the tiny birds in their nest, and with soft cries and little shrill notes he sought to quiet them. In a few moments the cries from the nest ceased, and, sheltered by the old man's love, the little hungry birds rested until he could procure them food. The youth marveled at the sight, for he had never supposed that there could be among the worlds of men one who so loved dumb creatures. The old hermit pointed ahead through a little ravine that opened before them, and there the hunter saw the peaked roof of a tiny cabin surrounded by little fir trees, and with an old tile for a chimney. A quaint, picturesque building of logs, but poorly matched. Still, this simple structure was enthroned in a frame more beautiful than words can describe. Down below the valley spread out beneath the endless grandeur of the rolling hills. By the side of it the melting stream ran, while behind it, up and up, rose the peaks of the snow-capped mountains. This, indeed, was a home in the heart of nature. About the house could be seen a number of animals. A wildcat cub rolled around in the sunlight, and an old bear was asleep with his nose between his paws, his tail just a tiny stump that wiggled mechanically as he felt in his sleep the presence of his friend. Birds were roosting in the trees nearby, and within a dozen feet of the cabin were 20 bird nests, for it seemed the little creatures of the air desired to come and build their nests of twigs around the cabin door. The old man invited the youth in. They entered and sat upon sawed-off ends of logs which served as stools. The cabin was bare of furnishing save for a rough straw pallet, and the only ornament was a wonderful ivory crucifix which hung upon the wall. The room was filled with birds and squirrels, and the young hunter stared in astonishment when he saw that a small hummingbird had built its nest in the arms of the crucifix. He then looked about for stove or food, but there was no sign of either. "So this is your home?" he murmured. "This is where the old man of the mountain lives?" "Yes," the hermit answered, "and here he has lived since the day when he realized that his brother man was false and that the beast was true. In all the world of men I found never a friend one half so faithful or one half so true as these wild beasts that live among the hills. When I look back at the sorrow of my life and the tears come to my eyes, my little birds all gather around me and sing their love songs in my ears, When I am tired, the great stag comes and bends his back that I may ride him. When I am hungry, then from mountains and caves come birds and beasts with food for me. I have given up the world of human things to serve the things which man abuses, to which he has been false. These birds, these little creatures that play around my door, even the wolves, the foxes, and the mountain lions, they are my brothers, and I their father and their elder brother. I ease the wounds that heartless hunters make, and they know that while I jive in this mountain, they have one friend in the world of men who will never be false. All the time that I have lived here, I have never spoken one harsh word to beast or bird, yet they serve me with perfect faith and perfect trust. A strange feeling came over the soul of the hunter. I shall hunt no more, he murmured, for I have seen the life and love and light in the souls of these beasts. I shall be true to it. That is well, said the old man slowly, and he extended his hand. Brother, I am proud that you have seen the light which shall sometime take from the world the karmic curse that rests upon all who slay their brothers. But night is falling in the mountains, and in the air I hear the cry of the bears and lions. I hear the pitiful wail of dying beasts, and I must go my way, so I will now take you back again to where I met you. I am an old man, and I have not much longer to stay here, but when I am gone, will you be true to the beasts whom I have loved and guarded, and who have loved me so well in return? Yes, answered the youth. To me also the world has ever been an empty place, and I shall fill that emptiness with the same thing with which you have filled yours. If you are called, I promise that I will come and live in your little hut, and go about as you do to serve the beasts. The old man stood for a few seconds, dimly visible in his soft gray gown, while the youth, lighted by the waning moon, climbed down the twisting path to the world that lay below. Occult qualities of herbs. The following article is the introduction of Nicholas Culpeper's Complete Herbal, a rare old book, written in and published at London Inn. It is copied here exactly as it was printed then, with all the peculiarities of punctuation and sentence formation. Although this may sometimes lead to confusion and some difficulty of grasping the meaning, the old-fashioned style of it is so odd and delightfully quaint, it would seem like marring to change a bit of it. Even though the manner of expression of is not so smoothly flowing and eloquent as in our days of a more polished tongue, still it should enhance rather than detract from the wonderfully deep and beautifully simple truths, written with such great pains and infinite care. But first, here is a short paragraph or two about the author's life and manner of living, taken from the preface of his book. Nicholas Culpeper, the writer of this work, was son of Nicholas Culpeper, a clergyman, and around son of Sir Thomas Culpeper, Bart. He, as sometime a student in the University of Cambridge, and soon after was bound apprentice to an apothecary. He employed all his leisure hours in the study of physic and astrology, which he afterwards professed, and set up business in Spitalfields, next door to the Red Lion, formerly known as the halfway house between Islington and Stepney, where he had considerable practice, and was much resorted to for his advice, which he gave to the poor gratis. Astrological doctors have always been highly respected, and those celebrated physicians of the early times, whom our author seems to have particularly studied, Hippocrates, Galen and Avicen, regarded those as homicides who were ignorant of astrology. Paracelsus, indeed, went farther. He declared, a physician should be predestinated to the cure of his patient, and the horoscope should be inspected, the plants gathered at the critical moment, etc. Culpeper was a writer and translator of several works, the most celebrated of which is his Herbal, being an astrologer physical discourse of the common herbs of the nation, containing a complete method or practice of physic, whereby a man may preserve his body in health, or cure himself when sick, with such things only as grow in England, they being most fit for English constitutions. This celebrated and useful physician died at his house in Spitalfields, in the year. This book will remain as a lasting monument of his skill and industry. Culpeper's original epistle to the reader. All other authors that have written of the nature of herbs give not a bit of reason why such an herb was appropriated to such a part of the body, nor why it cured such a disease. Truly, my own body being sickly, brought me easily into a capacity to know that health was the greatest of all earthly blessings, and truly he was never sick that doth not believe it. Then I considered that all medicines were compounded of herbs, roots, flowers, seeds, and seed, and this first set me to work in studying the nature of simple most of which I knew by sight before, and indeed all the authors I could read gave me but little satisfaction in this particular, or none at all. I cannot build my faith upon authors' words, nor believe a thing because they say it, and could wish everybody were of my mind in this, to labor to be able to give a reason for everything they say or do. They say reason makes a man differ from a beast. If that be true, pray what are they that, instead of reason for their judgment, quote old authors? Perhaps their authors knew a reason for what they wrote, perhaps they did not. What is that to us? Do we know it? Truly, in writing this work, first, to satisfy myself, I drew out all the virtues of the vulgar or common herbs, plants and trees, and out of the best or most approved authors I had, or could get, and having done so, I set myself to study the reason of them. I knew well enough the whole world and everything in it was formed of a composition of contrary elements, and in such a harmony as must needs show the wisdom and power of a great God. I knew as well this creation, though thus composed of contraries, was one united body, and man an epitome of it. I knew those various affections in man, in respect of sickness and health, were caused naturally, though God may have other ends best known to himself, by the various operations of the microcosm, and I could not be ignorant that as the cause is so must the cure be, and therefore he that would know the reason of the operation of the herbs, must look up as high as the stars. Astrologically, I always found the disease vary according to the various motions of the stars, and this is enough, one would think, to teach a man by the effect where the cause lies. Then to find out the reason of the operation of herbs, plants, and by the stars when and herein I could find but few authors, but those as full of nonsense and contradiction as an egg is full of meat. This not being pleasing, and less profitable to me, I consulted with my two brothers, Dr. Reason and Dr. Experience, and took a voyage to visit my mother Nature, by whose advice, together with the help of Dr. Diligence, I at last obtained my desire, and being warned by Mr. Honesty, a stranger in our days, to publish it to the world, I have done it. But you will say, what need I have written on this subject, seeing so many famous and learned men have written so much of it in the English tongue, much more than I have done? To this I answer, neither Gerard nor Parkinson, or any that ever wrote in the like nature, ever gave one wise reason for what they wrote, and so did nothing else but train up young novices in physic in the school of tradition, and teach them just as a parrot is taught to speak. An author says so, therefore it is true. And if all that authors say be true, why do they contradict one another? But in mine, if you view it with the eye of reason, you shall see a reason for everything that is written, whereby you may find the very ground and foundation of physic. You may know what you do, and wherefore you do it, and this shall call me Father, it being, that I know of, never done in the world before. I have now but two things to write, and then I have done. What the profit and benefit of this work is. Instructions in the use of it. The profit and benefits from it, or that may occur to a wise man from it, are many, so many that should I sum up all the particulars my epistle would be as big as my book. I shall quote some few general heads. First, the admirable harmony of creation is herein seen, in the influence of stars upon herbs and the body of man, how one part of the creation is subservient to another, and all for the use of man, whereby the infinite power and wisdom of God and the creation appear. And if I do not admire at the simplicity of the ranters, never trust me, who but viewing the creation can hold such a sottish opinion, as that it was from eternity, when the mysteries of it are so clear to every eye. But that Scripture shall be verified to them. Rom 1. The invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And a poet could teach them a better lesson, because out of thy thoughts God shall not pass. His image stamped is on every grass. This indeed is true. God has stamped his image on every creature, and therefore the abuse of the creature is a great sin. But how much the more do the wisdom and excellency of God appear, if we consider the harmony of the creation and the virtue and operation of every herb. Secondly, hereby you may now know what infinite knowledge Adam had in his innocence, that by looking upon a creature he was able to give it a name according to its nature, and by knowing that, thou mayest know how great thy fall was, and be humbled for it even in this respect, because hereby thou art so ignorant. Thirdly, here is the right way for thee to begin at the study of physic, if thou art minded to begin at the right end, for here thou hast the reason of the whole art. I wrote before in certain astrological lectures, which I read and printed, intituled Astrological Judgment of Diseases, what planet caused, as a second cause, every disease, how it might be found out what planet caused it. Here thou hast what planet cures it by sympathy and antipathy, and this brings me to my last promise, viz., instructions for the right use of the book. And herein let me premise a word or two. The herbs, plants, and sea are now in the book appropriated to their proper planets. Therefore, first, consider what planet causeth the disease, that thou mayest find it in my aforesaid judgment of diseases. Secondly, consider what part of the body is afflicted by the disease, and whether it lies in the flesh, or blood, or ventricles, or bones. Thirdly, consider by what planet the afflicted part of the body is governed, that my judgment of diseases will inform you also. Fourthly, you may oppose diseases by herbs of the planet, opposite to the planet that causes them, as diseases of Jupiter by herbs of Mercury, and the contrary, diseases of the luminaries by the herbs of Saturn, and the contrary, diseases of Mars by herbs of Venus, and the contrary. Fifthly, there is a way to cure diseases sometimes by sympathy, and so every planet cures his own disease, as the sun and moon by their herbs cure the eyes, Saturn the spleen, Jupiter the liver, Mars the gall and diseases of choler, and Venus diseases and the instruments of generation. Niche. Culpeper. From my house in Spitalfields, next door to the Red Lion, September. Little church among the flowers. In the years gone by, the sturdy Christians of a little town banded themselves together, giving of their labor and the fruits of their toil to the building of a temple wherein to worship God. Just a little wooden church with a quaint old-fashioned steeple that ended in a cross of wrought iron. Its walls were whitewashed, its floors were bare, and its altarpiece rough-hewn. In the years that came after, the plain windows of the little old building were supplanted by glorious stained glass pictures of angels and saints. Originally, the church was surrounded by the quaint little homes of the villagers, but as the years went by, these homes gave place to stores and buildings until at last a great city grew up around the village church. But through the change it remained a quaint little edifice, though towering skyscrapers and the bustle and confusion of a large metropolis grew noisy about. And so today it stands in the midst of a garden of flowers, among whose waving heads rises the old tombstones of the village churchyard, overgrown with ivy, broken down by age, and mutilated by wind and weather. Trailing creepers had been planted around the church, and now its walls were a mass of green leaves, and when the season is right, a splash of colored flowers, red, white and delicate shades of lavender shine out here and there. The sweet odor of the garden blooms were carried by the wind into the heart of the great city, so it seemed that this little church was an oasis of beauty in the midst of a desert of sordid things. Around it street cars roared, and there echoed about it the boom of the overhead railway. The newsboys howled their wares, and the bootblacks, their little boxes in their hands, sat along its ancient wall. From the great church of the small town, this old building had become a delicate memory in the great town. Many other churches there were, massive and glorious, throwing their arches and spires to the very skies. But somehow this little building still remained the most hallowed spot in that great city. From between its ancient portals brides and grooms rode away, and into its low doorway passed the caskets when the greatest of that city were laid to rest. Every Sunday morning snatches of sacred songs were wafted out of the open windows, or the old bell that called to prayer and could be heard sending out its peals as in the years gone by. It was known far and wide as the little church among the flowers, quaint and simple, carrying with it the breath of sweet lavender and those delicate old-world memories that are slowly dying out as the generations go by. Little old ladies, still living in the days of bustle and bonnet, came in each Sunday morning holding their tiny black parasols and hands partly shielded by those fingerless lace mitts that grandmother used to wear. The old couples came trotting in, the Romeos and Juliet, and they remembered the day when their fathers had swung their axes to hew the logs and their mothers' nimble fingers had twisted the yarns on the spinning wheel to weave the first curtain that hung in the little village church. They remembered the first minister of that church, the dear old doctor who now lay in the churchyard with morning glory vines twining over his gravestone. And everyone remembered and loved that dear old man, whose pulpit still hung in the anteroom of the church, whose tireless fingers themselves had driven the nails that built the pews now blackened with age, and whose tired, careworn yet sweet face had so many times gazed out upon the flock who had gathered in the years gone by. Father Jackson was dead, his successor had also been laid away, and now from a distant place had come a new minister to occupy the pulpit of the little church among the flowers. The first Sunday he came to them, the congregation was pleased. Both of those who had gone before him were simple men of simple ways, whose kindly message of brotherhood and love had helped to mold the lives of simple faiths, and the new minister bid fair to follow in their footsteps. The only difference was that he was very young. As he stood before them, they wondered at his boyish face, but then they wondered at several other things also. As he stood on the simple pulpit in his quiet black suit, one old lady whispered to her friend, as she touched her eyes with a little black bordered handkerchief, "The dear minister has suffered much. He looks like my son who has been gone for so many years." Everyone realized and agreed that this minister was a very strange man, a stranger one than had ever gone before. But as Sunday after Sunday rolled by and his clear, simple message found its way into their hearts, they hung his picture with the other two in the old hallway, for in his spirit they seemed to feel the sturdy pioneers of faith who had led them before. Let us try and build for you a picture of this new minister as he stands in the pulpit, the many-colored lights of the stained glass windows playing upon his slender, intellectual face. Father Huntley was still in his early 20s, and his fine face was unmarked by line or blemish. His brow, high and noble, met wavy locks of dark brown hair. His form was very slender, almost that of a wraith, and long slender fingers turned the pages of the ancient Bible, marked and remarked with the old-fashioned writing of the earnest souls of long ago. This young minister had great dark eyes that seemed to gaze right through everyone they looked upon, but nevertheless soft eyes seeming ready to weep all the time. His mouth, finely chiseled, had a slight droop at the corners which gave an air of sadness to his face. His voice, soft and musical, seemed ever filled with pathos, and he looked like one who, though young in years, had suffered deeply and known truly. When Father Huntley told of the simple life of the Master and his apostles, there was scarce a dry eye in the church, and then when he spoke of the finer sentiments of life, of love and friendship, of diligence and duty, a thrill went over his congregation. As the Sundays went by, the congregation grew larger and larger until each morning dozens who could not enter gathered in the courtyard of the church to listen to the voice which spoke with such strange eloquence and such sincere understanding of life's ever-changing sea. 3 years passed, and the minister had won his way into the hearts of each one of the simple folks who came there to the same pew where their fathers and grandparents had come for the last 75 years. His life was above reproach, and in the daily performance of his ministerial tasks he exhibited a spirit almost divine. Be it night or day, when he was called he was ever ready, always patient, ever kind. He fulfilled the little labors for his flock and sought to lead them in the path of godliness. When the month of June came around, it brought, as it always did, orange blossoms and bridal wreaths, and the greatest and noblest of that city came down to the little church among the flowers to be united in life's mysteries by the slender band of gold. But more than that, to receive the blessing of Father Huntley, who seemed to understand and know these emotions that so swayed their souls. One beautiful morning many rows of carriages and automobiles drew up before the little church among the flowers. 2 of the city's finest families were to be united through the marriage of their children. The little church was gloriously decorated with arches of orange blossoms and lilies. The choir was singing, and the pews were filled with the richest and noblest of the day. The bride, a little society butterfly, was demurely hanging upon the arm of her father, while the groom, an army captain with clanking sword and dress uniform, was surrounded by a number of his brother officers. It was a festive day. 2 little flower girls were strewing the aisle of the church with roses, and the old-fashioned organ that had so many times pealed out its notes filled the air with the soft notes of the wedding march. At the altar stood the minister, in his hands the open Bible, its pages turned to the marriage service. In his eyes was the same sad look that so often filled them, and his white hands were as pieces of marble against the pages before him. Down the aisle the solemn procession wound its way, youth and age together, celebrating one of life's most solemn mysteries. Before the altar they stopped, then in his clear, musical voice the minister read the marriage service. There was a deep pathos in his tones as he slowly pronounced the words of the sacred ritual, and when he asked if there were any who knew why those two should not be united in the holy bond of matrimony, it seemed that his voice caught. Then he went on. Placing their hands together, he raised one of his own to heaven, pronouncing in clear, distinct tones that thrilled through the whole church, "In the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, I pronounce you man and wife." There was a hush for about a moment, a weight seemed in the air, and then the organ broke the heavy silence. In a few seconds the scene again became one of life and ambition. "Congratulations," a few previously prepared sobs from the bride, perfectly timed and romantically performed, showers of rice and old shoes, the honking of automobile horns, cries of congratulations, and a few seconds later the church was empty of its throng, and all that remained was the slender, sad-eyed minister, his face illuminated by a golden light which shone down through a yellow pane in the window. A heavy cloud holding winter rain hung over the city, in whose heart stood the little church of the flowers. The gray light coming through the window panes sent weird shadows among the pews and rafted ceiling of the ancient building. The pigeons that nested in the bell tower were circling around the ancient belfry, uttering plaintive cries at the approaching storm. At first it seemed that the church is deserted, but looking more closely there could be seen a figure sitting alone in the front pew, his hands clasped in prayer and his eyes raised to the great gilded cross that hung over the altar. No words sounded from the lips of the praying man, but from his heart poured out a great stream of feeling which seemed to circle round and round the ancient crucifix carved from rockwood and gilded by the now still hand of Father Jackson. It was the young minister who sat there, dimly outlined in the pale and uncertain light. He sat as he had many times before, seeking solace for an unknown emptiness and the cross he so devoutly served. As he prayed, there came the sound of a swinging door, a gray shaft of light appeared, and framed against it stood the figure of a well-built and erect man who passed slowly down the aisle of the church and sank into one of the pews near the minister. Then the visitor saw Father Huntley for the first time. He sat for some minutes studying the face of the minister, then as the prayers seemed ended, he crossed over and touched the minister lightly on the shoulder. "Reverend sir," he asked, "do you not remember me?" The minister looked up for a second as if undecided, then a smile spread over his face and he extended his hand. "Yes, I remember you well. You are Captain Hendricks, whom I married in this little church last year." "You have a good memory," answered the other, accepting the hand and clasping it warmly. "Yes," in a faraway voice as though speaking with the words of memory, "I remember it well, one of the most beautiful weddings that was ever held in the little church of the flowers." "Surely, brother, the blessing of God was upon you that day." The other man's head drooped, and to the amazement of the minister he sank on his knees in the aisle. Father Huntley knew that his visitor was crying, and his long slender hand rested softly on the captain's shoulder as he exerted a slight pressure of sympathy. "Have things not gone well with you?" he asked. "Ah, no," answered the other, as with a tremendous effort he shook off the passing weakness and rose to face the minister. "No, things have not gone well. You remember the little laughing-eyed girl whom I led to the altar?" "Yes," answered the minister softly, the sad look creeping into his eyes. "I remember her. Has she not been true?" The young captain shook his head. "Alas, no. I idolized her, built her into the shrine of my soul, but to her I have always been a plaything. A few days ago she left me, leaving nothing behind but this little note and a broken heart. In my sorrow there seemed to come back to my mind that strange expression on your face the day you married us, and I have come to ask you, friend, both advice and comfort, for I have need of them. Something tells me you too have suffered deeply, and maybe you can give me the strength to go on after the idol of my heart has deserted me." The minister placed his hand gently on the captain's shoulder and pointed up to the cross over the altar. "In life, brother," he spoke sincerely, "each must take his cross. I have had mine, you now have yours. In the hours of silence I am indeed alone, for it seemed I was born with a broken heart. Through years of lonely youth I wandered. There were none who knew and none who understood, so, alone and heavy-hearted, I renounced the world and all that is in it, or rather shall I say, I gave up that which I had never had and renounced an unreality I had never known. I imagine that the great master must have felt as I did, so I sought to forget myself by serving others. Coming to this little church soon after graduating from the theological seminary, I found one here who seemed to know and seemed to understand, and the spark which had long been dead, in fact had never been lighted, burst into flame within my heart, even as it must have done in yours. I kept an idol in my dreams for many years during my service here as the minister of this church. I wound that idol into my prayers. I saw in it the glory of a Madonna, and the face of saint and martyr seemed not so good as that of the idol in my heart. But mine was broken even as yours has been, so I can comfort and console you in your sorrow by saying there is a sweetness in it all. In losing the world of men one finds the world of God. I live no more in the bustle and confusion of life, and, God willing, I will stay here in the Church of the Flowers until someday I am laid to rest with those who have gone before, among the morning glory vines and honeysuckle in the little churchyard behind." As the minister spoke, a strange light was shining in his face. I have read of the monks in their meditation, how in the prayer and silence great visions came to them that they painted in crude colors upon the walls of their cells. I have heard how a year after with colored inks and ancient parchments they wrote and illuminate words of glory to their God and King. As I walk in the gloom of this old church, I seem to feel a cowl fall about my shoulders, and it seems that somewhere in the distant past, in the brown robe of the mendicant, I wandered amid the arches and pillars of some ancient monastery. I wandered into this world with the body of a man and the heart of a monk. I sought to leave these gray walls, not of stone but of the soul, and be like other living things in the world without. I saw one who seemed to dream of the ages, a face that might have haunted me had I drawn paintings upon dungeon walls or matched fine blocks of marble into mosaics as did those of old. When the world has been false to you, brother, come here to me. I came into this world for a great lesson, and I have learned it. I can aid you in learning yours also. What lesson came you to learn, Reverend Sir? Asked the soldier respectfully. I came to learn to love as God loves, answered the minister, looking up once again at the massive crucifix. I learned to love and give that which I love the most. You think you love, sir, and you weep for that which has left you. I loved, but I would have left if the one I had loved had stayed. My romance was short-lived, a few short words, a merry laugh, but it left in my soul a mark which ages of loneliness had made hungry for such a token. I dreamed of that day, I lived for that day, and on Sunday mornings as I spoke the soft words of the Master to my flock, I spoke it to one more than all the rest, the one who seemed to understand. Your romance, sir, has ended even as mine has ended. It seems I had waited 100,000 years for that day, but to have it slip away, like all things earthly, and leave me alone again with my God. I am not so alone with him now, for I see and understand better. But when that momentous day was over, when my dream was shattered, I fell at the foot of yonder altar and would gladly have died there, for there seemed nothing left in life worthwhile. 3 whole nights I lay in prayer at the foot of that altar, praying for death, for anything to take away the utter loneliness of my life, but I had to live. A voice was endlessly whispering, "Go on, go on." The minister's hands were on the shoulders of the captain, and his eyes were gazing into those of the soldiers, who felt in his soul the agony of the other. You lost your dream after it was realized. I lost mine before. Who shall say which is better? I learned to love and to give up the thing I loved, and if you love her well enough, you will send her on her way in peace, realizing that your greatest love, if it be true, rests in her happiness. Father, how can you say that? Exclaimed the captain. How can you say that? If I love her best, I will let her go. Do you not realize I live for her alone? The minister nodded his head. I do, he answered, that is what I say. Alas, Father, you have had but little of this world's romance, answered the captain. But you could not love as I have loved, and then stand by while another steals the idol of your dream. I have done that and more, answered the minister. I have stood by and aided in the giving. The laughing, blue-eyed girl to whom I married you last year was the one who had been the idol of my dream. She found happiness in you, and I found happiness in her gladness. He turned quickly and walked silently away. At the door that led to the little rectory, he turned and held out his hand in benediction to the captain. Goodbye, brother, he said, smiling softly. You will go back to your world again, but I shall stay here. When you are sad, come to me, for you will always find one who understands here in the little church among the flowers. Copyright 2025 by Manly Hall Official. Thank you for listening. Please consider to subscribe, like, and share to help the channel growth. New videos on a daily basis.